Welcome to Football Game Plan's Fantasy Football Starting Lineup. I'm Emery Hunt, the czar of the playbook, as always, joined by fellow Football Game Plan analyst Chris James. You can follow him at CJ Florida9. I'm at FBall Game Plan. And what a week one it was in the NFL. Now we're week two. But before we get into that, CJ, you see what's above my shoulder right there? You recognize that?
I think that's a McMahon helmet.
Shout out to McMahon High School in New Orleans, Louisiana. If you guys didn't know, Chris and I were former high school football teammates. And just to give you guys a heads up on Chris, one of the best receivers I ever played with, one of the best athletes I ever seen, both on the football field, track and field, and on the basketball court. So don't think he's some scrub. Chris get out there today and still do the same things he did 20 plus years ago. So shout out to CJ and the McMahon High School Mustangs. You realize McMahon has done like so well since we left. Like we set the foundation. We got these guys to the playoffs and had a really good season, but they've gone deep into the playoffs. They played the Superdome for state championship games. Done very well for themselves. They got a gym now.
I mean, I wish we had all that back in the day. It would have been definitely different.
All right, a lot different than what we ended up using for our high school stuff. But you guys are here to get our fantasy football analysis, and week one is in the books, and we're getting ready to start week two. And you always want to start your fantasy week on the waiver wire. So, Chris, who's some of the guys starting at the quarterback position that you're looking for on the waiver wire this week?
There's a couple of guys actually. Gardner Minshew. We saw what he did last week. At one point, he was 19-20 in the game, which is just insane. That would have been the NFL record prior to Drew Brees' performance last year against the Colts. I'm looking at Gardner Minshew this week. I'm looking at Kirk Cousins. He's generally not the guy that is known for throwing the ball over the top, but it's a good matchup this week. And then the final guy is actually a guy who I think has to earn his money and earn his keep. And that's Jimmy Garoppolo. In a matchup with the Jets, look what they let Josh Allen do last week, which honestly, he's a better passer than Allen, so he should be able to go back over the top again this week and get some big numbers up.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about that Jets defense gave up a lot, but they didn't give up a lot on the ground. So you look at some running backs that may be on the waiver wire this week. Who are you trying to pick up?
I'm actually going to go with everyone's talking about him because he's kind of the starting running back out there, but I'm going with Malcolm Brown. If he's still available in your league, which I doubt it at this point, but you go ahead and pick him up. He's the starting running back for right now there. Nyheim Hines. Look, listen, they're not just going to give the reins over to Jonathan Taylor 100%, especially if you're playing in a PPR league. He's going to handle all the third down duty and get some carries. And then you also want to look at Joshua Kelly. Again, you want to get guys that have the opportunity in an offense to actually become the starter, and he's a guy who I think will still be available on the waiver wire this week.
It's interesting. Last week we talked about a guy that would stay away from would be Austin Eckler, and this week you're talking about a guy in Joshua Kelly who scored a touchdown last week against the Bengals as someone to pick up on the waiver wire. And I want to ask you, a lot of people have been asking about this Rams backfield situation. Everyone over the summer was all in on Cam Akers. I was all in on Darrell Henderson until he started hurt his hamstring, and he's slowly working back. You saw him play against the Cowboys, but we also saw Malcolm Brown go off. So make sense of that Rams backfield for me right quick.
So the best way I can say it is if you have a Rams running back, unless it's Malcolm Brown at this exact stage, you can't start one, but you have to keep him on your roster because Darrell Henderson's too talented. We talked about him last week. Cam Akers is seen as the guy, but not yet. And then again, Malcolm Brown is the lead dog for right now. I think talent will prevail and more carries will start to go towards Akers and Darrell Henderson.
That's how I feel too. I feel like talent will prevail in the end, but it's hard to ignore what Malcolm Brown did last week against the Dallas Cowboys. Now we move out to the perimeter, and man, if you have any Rams receiver, I think you're in good shape. But who you're searching a waiver wire for this week?
A guy who did play last week, but I think eventually he's going to be the number one receiver in Philly, and that's Jalen Reagor. We know about the talent. He had marred quarterback play at TCU, but now with Carson Wentz, I think that they're going to actually do some things with him, deep threat and underneath. Looking at Paris Campbell as well. T.Y. Hilton was a little inconsistent last week, and he's getting a little older. Paris Campbell, super talented, former, I believe, second-round pick. And then the final guy is actually a guy in Robbie Anderson in an offense that is going to be good, and they go against Tampa Bay this week, so they're going to have to put up numbers, so he's a guy who can get you some points in what should be a high-scoring game.
Some good choices right there. And you talked about the tight end position. You talked about Tampa Bay, and I wanted to segue into the tight ends. And we saw O.J. Howard get in the end zone. We saw Gronkowski get some work. So who are some of the tight ends this week that are on the waiver wire that you should suggest that people go pick up?
So the first guy might not be there anymore because he's moving up. He's in a dual tight end situation, but that's Dallas Goedert. This situation kind of reminds me of when Gronkowski and another gentleman, and Hernandez was there, and they were both top 10 type tight ends. So he should be picked up. And then a sneaky play, especially for this week, Greg Olsen. I think on the perimeter, they're going to do some things against Seattle, and that's going to leave the middle of the field with a vacated linebacking core, including Dante Hightower. That's not going to account for a guy like Greg Olsen, who's super crafty.
Yeah, and it's funny because last episode, it's funny to look back at the previous episode and have some information going into this episode. But we were all on Blake Jarwin, and all of a sudden this man gets hurt. Week 1, tears his ACL. Do you see Schultz for the Cowboys being anything of significance fantasy-wise?
So, could be. At this point, I wouldn't run out and grab him, but keep an eye on him. If you have a bench spot available and you want to take a flyer tight end, go for it because he's going to be the starter moving forward. He's not as talented as Blake Jarwin, all due respect to his talent, but they were high on him. Now let's see if Schultz can actually get the job done. So just keep an eye on him.
Be interested to see if Dallas is in the market for a tight end because we know one team, i.e. in the NFC South, that has a bevy of tight ends on their roster. But we'll step aside, take a quick break, and be back with more football game plans, fantasy football starting lineup. Be sure to order your copy of the Go-Go Offense by Coach Brennan Marion on footballgameplan.com/GoGoOffense. Coach Marion goes through the ins and outs of his explosive offense, one that's tearing up the college football field and putting a lot of points on the scoreboard. Again, you can order your copy at footballgameplan.com/GoGoOffense. And welcome back to Football Game Plan's Fantasy Football Starting Lineup. Emery Hunt, the czar of the playbook, along with Chris James. Again, follow him at CJFlorida9. Smash that follow button on Twitter. Subscribe on YouTube at youtube.com/footballgameplan. Also, check out and subscribe on iTunes to Football Game Plan Podcast and leave us a 5-star rating.
So, you know what? On the waiver wire, it's often forgot about in the fantasy world, but defense. We forgot to talk about some defenses for this week.
We sure did forget to talk about some defenses, and I'm pretty sure in week 2, there's some matchups that I like defensively that have a chance to really get you some points.
Yeah. Now, see, I have 2 that you might not think are good matchups, but I actually like them this week. The first one is going to be the New Orleans Saints. We saw what they did against that high-flying Tampa Bay offense. And now they get the Rams, 2 young receivers, and Derek Carr as the quarterback. That secondary is real, and if you got him on the waiver wire, go pick him up. And the second one is actually a team that you would think won't have a good week because of what the Cardinals did against the 49ers. But I'm going to go with the Washington football team. Listen, that front 4, actually 5 at this point, looks like what San Francisco had to offer last year. And we forget how good of a defensive coach Ron Rivera is. This could be one of those sneaky games where they end up being a top 3 defense that you don't expect.
Yeah, and they also getting back Kendall Fuller healthy out there at corner. They played last week without Fuller, and it was amazing to see them compete in that game against Philadelphia. Although they did give up 2 deep touchdowns, maybe that changes if Fuller is in the lineup. Although the people's corner, and Jimmy Moreland got himself an interception and let people know about it. They say he's going to get to the end zone next time. So I want you to rank these players, Chris, because, you know, these are some guys that had pretty solid weeks, and they didn't have the fantasy buzz that many people had going into the season, and that's Teddy Bridgewater, Carson Wentz, and also Jimmy Garoppolo. How would you rank those 3?
So this is for season long, correct?
Season long, yeah, from now to the end of the season, fantasy season.
So I'm going to go with number 3, Jimmy Garoppolo. Listen, I think he's going to have a big week this week, but for the remainder of the season, we know what San Francisco wants to do as a unit. So from a fantasy perspective, he's not going to put up enough passes to truly be as viable as the other 2 guys. Number 2 is Teddy Bridgewater. People are sleeping on how good this offense is going to be. We've mentioned it last week. We'll mention it again this week. This is going to be a really good offense that's also supported by a defense that's not yet there, so they have to put up points. And then number 1, because I have to trust in what I see, which is they want Carson Wentz to be the guy. They just need to get healthy along the offensive line. And that defensive line of the Washington football team that we discussed was better than expected for most, not us. So I like Carson Wentz. I actually think that he's going to, if you can grab Carson Wentz from people, they might be ready to jump off the ship. He will have a great season, actually, in my opinion.
Moving on to the running back position. I chose these running backs because, one, they had a lot of buzz. Some had a lot of buzz. Some are underrated. Some may be thrust into a starting role dealing with nagging injuries by the guy that's ahead of them on the depth chart. But rank these guys for me. Antonio Gibson in Washington, Chase Edmonds out there in Arizona, and also James Robinson down there in Jacksonville.
Okay, so for season long, I have a couple of, kind of methods that I'll use. I look at opportunity and then talent. So the opportunity does not match up for this guy, but the talent does, and that's Chase Edmonds. Right now, Kenyon Drake is the starter. They're also going to force a lot of passes to DeAndre Hopkins because that's what they want to do. So he's number 3, and it has nothing to do with his talent. It's just the opportunity. Number 2 is Antonio Gibson. Again, talented guy, but Peyton Barber got the 2 touchdowns for a reason. So until he is actually the true starter, you can't depend on him. So I'm going with James Robinson, a sneaky guy. I know you like him, and he has the opportunity because he's already the starter. So that's how I would put it. And that offense is a lot better on the ground than I actually thought it was going to be, because I thought they were going to be super pass heavy.
Yeah, it's interesting to see him just really take off as a undrafted rookie free agent. But when you do all the things you do, or you did at Illinois State, and also down at the East-West Shrine game, it should be no surprise that he was out there doing well in his debut. Now, at the receiver position, it's interesting because you could have multiple guys start on your lineup, but I feel like these are your quintessential wide receiver 2, maybe even a wide receiver 3. Some may even have one of these guys in their flex spot or even on their bench. But rank Christian Kirk, Tyler Boyd of the Cincinnati Bengals, and Robbie Anderson for Carolina.
Similar story, and people out there who have followed me on Twitter, several years ago I was huge on Christian Kirk coming out. I thought he was a first-round talent. I still do think he's a first-round talent, but he's number 3 on my list. Again, until that offense shows me that they're not going to force-feed DeAndre Hopkins and then also run the ball, I'm not going to believe it. So for right now, season long, he's the number 3 guy. Number 2, I'm going to go with Tyler Boyd. They've talked about the Joe Burrow to the slot connection, but I think this is an A.J. Green show once they actually get things rolling and Joe Mixon out of the backfield. So Boyd, again, won't get as many opportunities as he might have in the past. And then my number 1 guy is going to be Robbie Anderson. Again, he's the fast guy in that offense, the speed guy, and Teddy Bridgewater has a better arm than people think. We saw the big touchdown last week. That's not an anomaly. That's going to happen several times this year. So I would go with Robbie Anderson, number 1.
Yeah, Robbie Anderson broke that game open, and unfortunately their defense, the Panthers defense, just couldn't hold the game for them, keeping the Raiders from making big plays deep down the field. And I don't know who told them to hand the football off to not Christian McCaffrey on that 4th down. That made absolutely no sense, and a big reason why they lost that ball game. But I want to throw a curveball at you for the tight end position. All right, you have Hunter Henry for the Los Angeles Chargers. You have both Eagle tight ends, Dallas Goedert, Zach Ertz. Rank these guys moving forward.
So here's what I think is going to happen. I'm going to put Goddard at 3. From what I hear, they love him, right? But again, it's going to be opportunity. I think they're going to start to go outside more often. Last week was a weird game. So I'm going to go Goddard, still a good pickup. Then I'm going to go with Ertz because Goddard's going to cannibalize some of that stuff. He's going to cannibalize some of the tight end targets. Both will do a good job, but I got Hunter Henry number 1. Again, he gets all the opportunity as they get healthier as an offense. And also, I do expect at some point this season, even if Tyrod Taylor continues to play well, that they're going to play Justin Herbert. And rookie quarterbacks love tight ends. So he's going to get peppered with targets if Justin Herbert does come in the game.
I'm interested to hear your thoughts on that Eagles situation with the tight ends because, everything's coming out of Philly. It's all on fire right now. They lost to Washington. They blew a lead. Carson Wentz, taking sacks, turned the ball over. Ertz with a big drop. Goddard had the touchdown. So right now they're looking at Ertz, and we know Ertz has a contract situation that he's not happy with. Put some comfort on the Eagles fans right now and tell them what they have at that position with those 2 guys.
You have the best tight end situation in the entire NFL, and that includes Tampa Bay. You have a guy who we both believe was a first-round talent coming out in Dallas Goedert, and they, again, really like him. You have a guy in Zach Ertz who, let's go ahead and get it out of the way, favorite target of Carson Wentz. We've seen it over and over again. So no matter who the guy is, which I think they'll both get their fair share, you're going to have a winning tight end. So Ertz didn't have a great game last week. You know what? That's going to happen. But he still scored a touchdown for you. And that's going to be commonplace because he's going to get a good amount of targets this year. And Goddard isn't a bad backup if anything does happen to Ertz.
Yeah, they again, when you have one tight end, it's hard to defend. If you have two, it's next to impossible. They have two legit threats. We saw Goddard catch a great ball deep down the field. We had to adjust for it. So they're fine at the tight end position. It's just week one. Eagles fans, calm down. The Eagles are not in bad shape. They should be fine moving forward as people continue to get healthier on that roster. And we'll take another break and be back with the final piece of our episode, which is the much anticipated starting lineup. So we'll be back shortly after these commercial breaks.
Man, it's that old thing, perseverance, consistency, hard work. My goal is to put the same work into, my businesses, my family that I put into football, and I've been running with that mantra since I got married back in '97, that if I'm going to have a successful marriage, I got to, the same hard work and same consistency and discipline I had on the football field, I got to put in my marriage and with my kids and with my businesses and all that. So it teaches you a lot, man. How to deal with your fellow man and not look at his color, but look at what he can do for the overall good of what you're trying to accomplish. So sports to me in general is just an incredible deal when you talk about football specifically because of the closeness of guys. I just believe it's an amazing sport.
And welcome back to Football Game Plan's Fantasy Football Starting Lineup. Emory Hunt, the czar of the playbook, along with Chris James at CJ Florida 9. I'm at F-Ball Game Plan. And Chris, it's time to unveil your starting lineup, starting with your starting lineup, your starts. And I see you have Tom Brady, big and bold right there, starting at your quarterback position.
Yeah, so we already discussed the Carolina defense and how they're still a work in progress. Derek Carr didn't throw the ball all around the yard, but he threw it around the yard enough. And we know what they want to do. Tom Brady is one of those guys who is uber competitive. He still has a lot of juice left, or at minimum a little juice, whatever. They're going to throw the ball a bunch. They're probably going to put up 3 to 4 touchdowns, and it'll be because of the arm of Tom Brady. I think he's a great play this week against the Carolina Panthers.
It started out hot versus the Saints, and then it just kind of cooled off. But that's more of a testament to that Saints defense that you talked about earlier. And we know Carolina is not there yet defensively, so you're right. Brady should have a big day against the Panthers. Now let's look at your sitting lineup. And it's interesting because you have a guy here on this list in Noah Fant who had a big game, I think, last week against Tennessee. Why you have him on your sits list?
And you know what? I talked about Noah Fant last week. I have him on a couple of fantasy teams. I have him as a sit this week because here's what I think the Pittsburgh Steelers as a defense will do. Whatever is your biggest threat or the one that they feel like they can't let you get off on, they're going to take away. We saw what they did to Saquon Barkley and even Evan Ingram to a smaller extent or a lesser extent. They have too many matchup pieces in both the slot and also at the safety position, as well as linebacker, for Fant to have that type of game this week. He went off because they were focused on the exterior. I think he'll be the focal point on the interior this week, and they'll look to shut him down.
Yeah, that should be a great game, man. I just want to get your thoughts. I spoke about this on Twitter. Did it seem weird to you that every time the Giants ran the football, it was Tecmo Bowl like blitz in the backfield?
Yeah, and so why it was weird wasn't because any individual lineman was getting his tail whipped. Everyone did, and it was from so many different positions. And to your point, it was so often, right? So you start to think, do they know something? Or I know they were focused on stopping Saquon Barkley, but I've never seen someone get tackled before they have the ball in their hands so many times as Saquon Barkley did last week.
It was crazy. It was like, every play y'all blowing up, every run play y'all blowing up the entire offensive line. I don't know if it was Nick Gates because he's a new center and you didn't have a preseason, or if it was Daniel Jones, or if it was, formation. They're under center as opposed to in the shotgun. I couldn't tell what it is or what it was, but I know every time this man got the ball, like literally they were in the backfield. I have never seen that happen not just, all throughout the game. It happened every run play.
Yeah, and it starts to be a thing where, and it's subtle, but this is why these guys get paid a lot of money. There might be something with the offensive lineman sets in this new offense that kind of let them know that something was coming. So let's see how they do this week against, I believe they're playing the Bears.
Yeah, it's an even tougher matchup, just as tough as a matchup with Khalil Mack and company on that offensive line. But before we get out of here, we got to talk sleepers. Who are some of the sleepers that you're keeping an eye on this weekend in week 2?
And so I try to go with some guys that are available this week instead of just going with some guys that worked out. So I'm going to go with Jimmy Garoppolo at quarterback. Like I said, against the Jets, yes, they're injured at receiver. There's no George Kittle. That says he shouldn't have a good game. Not so fast, my friends. Again, the Jets will try to focus on the run. I think they can hit him over the top to play action. At the running back position, I'm going to go with J.K. Dobbins versus the Texans. He was the more explosive running back last week, even though Mark Ingram was still the starter. I think in this game, one of two things happens. Either he pops it one early or the Texans get down big and they try to run the clock out late. Either way, he can get you points. Another guy is Paris Campbell. We talked about him earlier as far as a guy to pick up this week. I do think that he has a good game over this Minnesota defense that just literally could not stop anyone. And from a tight end perspective, we mentioned Greg Olsen earlier. Again, sneaky little tight end play this week that could probably get you a touchdown. And from a defensive perspective, they're still out there. The Rams front is really good. And the Eagles line, even if they get back Lane Johnson this week, is not up to snuff for that defensive front.
I lied. I got one more question. Week 1 is filled with overreactions, right? So what is your biggest overreaction that you've seen from week 1? And what's your biggest underreaction that, hey, man, this is big and no one's talking about it?
So my biggest overreaction that I've seen, let me go with my biggest underreaction. The Jacksonville Jaguars offense could be actually really good from a fantasy perspective. DJ Chark didn't have a great game, but you looked around, they put up points. I didn't think they were going to be good, to be candid, but they could actually be really good. So just watch out for that. My biggest overreaction, I think people are going to overreact a little bit to what, and he's my number 3 quarterback in the NFL right now if I needed a game one, but to what Aaron Rodgers did last week. I think people were going to say, oh goodness, I got to go and get Aaron Rodgers. Let me trade away Dak Prescott or Deshaun Watson. Please don't do that. No shade to Aaron Rodgers, but that's not going to be the secondary that he plays every week. So don't overreact to that one.
Good stuff right there, Chris. Final thought on week 2. What game is your game to watch this weekend? I know you're watching all the games, but what's the main game that's going to stay on that you won't change from?
The main game that is going to stay on that I will not change from is going to be two guys that I affectionately act like they're my sons. I want to see Baltimore versus Houston. Houston ended up not playing as well against the Chiefs as people might have thought they would. I think that they'll play better this week, but I think that Baltimore team is such a juggernaut. I actually think this will be an entertaining game, and it will have fantasy relevance on both sides of the ball.
I'm excited to see the Patriots and the Seahawks because I want to see Cam Newton and Jamal Adams. I think that's going to be a nice chess match throughout the course of the game. So that's it for this edition of Football Game Plan's Fantasy Football Starting Lineup. Emery Hunt, the czar of the playbook. That's Chris James at CJ Florida 9. That's McMain High School in New Orleans. Shout out to Steve Boyer who put in a request for a high school helmet to get back there. So that one's for you, Steve. And follow us on Twitter, Instagram. Subscribe on YouTube to footballgameplan.com, and that's youtube.com/footballgameplan, and also on iTunes to Football Game Plan Podcast, and leave us a 5-star rating.